Yeah, exactly that one.
Perfect. Okay. Great. So we're going to go ahead and install the package. I would just like to call out one quick thing right here. This link. Notice how at the very beginning of this link it shows NA73. So that is the link to the to a Salesforce instance. So in some cases, if you're logged into multiple orgs, like this will probably change. Your dev orgs will likely not be NA73. They might be, but they could be something completely different. Okay, so we'll go ahead. Just make sure you're logged into your org. I thought it was control click, but that's not. I think it's Apple click or something like that. I'm just going to copy and paste because I tried all the options. Great. And so then navigating to this link, if by chance, so it's really important here that you look at the domain at the beginning of this link. If it's wrong, for example, if you're on Infoblox and it says like, if they have a custom domain, then that link, the URL might be different at the beginning. You can just take the rest of the URL and paste that at the end of whatever your Salesforce instance that you're logged in as. But if you only have one org that you're logged in as, this link will update to be whichever that org is automatically. And then we're going to want to choose install for all users. So what this will do is this will give permissions to all of the objects and fields that we're installing to all of the users. So after you're done with that, go ahead and click install. Okay, I haven't clicked that yet. I'm going to show one other thing up here. So this is a managed package. So the way that that works is, this link is to some packaging system that Salesforce has. We can click on View Components, and this will show everything that's included in this managed package. There it is. Okay, so this will show the type of item that exists. This will show the type of component, so Apex class, trigger, etc. So you can look through this list to get an idea of all the things that is going to be installed, which is quite a few things. A lot.
Is everybody able to access the link and get this page to come up? Just wanted to make sure.
Yep.
And only do the CPQ one. Tomorrow at the end of the day, inside the slide deck that we sent you guys, there's an advanced approvals one. We'll work on that tomorrow because there's an unmanaged package included in that installation. And so again, we want to walk through that together. But essentially, just do this Salesforce CPQ one for right now.
Okay. So Salesforce, anytime that you want to make an HTTP call out from Salesforce to an external system, you have to enable every single endpoint, the domain of every single third party or external website. But because that can be potentially a security concern, anytime you install a managed package that reaches external servers, they're just showing you, oh, hey, by the way, we're going to enable these URLs to be enabled for callouts. Are you okay with that? Which is required. So Stillbrick, their calculation service is all written in Node on a Heroku server. So when we go through the quote calculation process behind the scenes, it's making callouts to do our calculations, and then utilizing the API in some other cases. So go ahead and hit yes and continue. After that, this menu will come up. After a few minutes, you'll get a notification saying this is taking a long time to complete, and then you'll get an email once it's fully complete. It can take up to 30 minutes. So I think right now, if everyone can, if you don't have your computer in here, if you can go log in and complete these steps right now, and we'll, it should just take about 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, so I would say less than 5 minutes. It's essentially just make sure you log into your dev org. If you're sharing a computer and you just want to do it within here, you can log out of the current org, log into the other org, start the process, and it will keep installing through all orgs. So it's up to you guys. If you need to step out, feel free. If everybody has already done so or will do so by installing Salesforce CPQ, we'll go ahead and jump right into the fuse kit demo.
Okay. You can also do it after the class is over, just before tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anyone that's still working through that process?
So this is the message that you get.
Are you guys good on the back row?
Yep.
Is good?
So go ahead and click done, and then we'll go ahead and, like Austin said, you'll receive an email with the completion of the installation.
Okay. Are there any questions?
No.
All right, so we're going to be moving from Salesforce into FuseKit. FuseKit is an application that I built. Sorry, we recorded that. That's all right. So we're going to jump into FuseKit. So let's go ahead and log into the home screen here. So FuseKit is an application that I built. We have 2 clients that are using it. Anyone that has an ATG email account right now, we have OAuth integration. So if you have an ATG email address, then you automatically have access to log into this tool. We're working with our legal team to figure out if we can let your whole team have access to this tool. Otherwise, it would be, once they get access to ATG, they would get this tool. So I built this tool mainly for Salesforce developers and implementation consultants and administrators to have easier access to working with the platform. So we need to know things like API names. What are all the values in a pick list? We need to be able to query data, do data loads. Maybe we need to compare to see, hey, in dev and UAT, we're getting different behavior. We need to compare to see what the differences are in the metadata to try to troubleshoot our issues, or just have confidence that our deployment was successful. So those are some of the types of things. So I'm going to go through quite a few areas in this tool. The URL for this is fusekit.io. And then I'll just review the tech stack one more time. This is full stack JavaScript. So there's a backend that's written in Node on Roku. Everything is written in TypeScript. And then the front end is using Angular 4. And then Bootstrap CSS, really common. And that's probably it. And then all the user settings. So I'll jump over to the orgs page here. So once you log in, you have to connect an org. And so connecting an org creates an OAuth 2 connection to whatever Salesforce orgs that you have. And then it'll store the refresh token locally in your browser using local storage. And so that if it needs to, it'll just keep getting a refresh token or new access token so that it can just keep making API calls over time. So, but none of that's stored on our servers. It's all in your browser. All right, so the way that this works is it's made so that you can connect to as many Salesforce orgs as you want, and you can easily switch between those orgs. So an example would be, I want to query the product catalogs in dev, all the product catalog records in dev, and then I want to query that same data in UAT. A lot of competitors to this tool will require that you log out and log back in under a different account. So I've geared this towards like a consultant that's working with lots of orgs at once, so you can just flip the org and now you're working with a different org. So these are all the orgs that I have connected. I think, yeah, so quite a few different organizations here. So what happens is when you log in, it'll automatically go get refresh tokens for all your orgs. If for some reason you want to stop that, I do allow the ability to uncheck that box. Okay, so this is the org page that just shows a list of your orgs. Let's go ahead and we'll jump into the query page first. This is the most common place that a user might go. All right, give me 1 second here. Okay. Perfect.
No, I moved the window away.
Okay, that's right. I'm going to close out of Teams here.
You want to disturb?
No, because it randomly goes off that. Yeah. So, okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a full page refresh here. Okay. So this is the query page. So what the query page does, when it loads here in just a moment, This page allows you to generate SOQL queries. For anyone that doesn't know what SOQL is, that's the Salesforce Object Query Language. It's the same thing as SQL, but it's made for working with the Salesforce database. So the query page, once this page loads, the first thing you'll notice over here on the left-hand side, this will show a list of all the objects in Salesforce. You'll see a bunch of items here that you won't see in the UI because Salesforce represents a whole bunch of things as objects, but through configuration at the database level, they expose them to users in slightly different ways. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and type in a filter. So let's say that we want to query all the leads. Since we were working with leads today, I'm going to use that object so we can see the customizations that we did earlier in the day. All right, so clicking on lead, this will just show a field selector. So this is where you can build your SOQL query. So it's just point and click, like, oh, I want a SOQL query. I want to get the name of all the leads, city.
And you can see it building it automatically on the right-hand side.
Yep, so as you check these boxes, just in real time, it's building your query. You can filter up here. Notice that we get the field label. We also get the API name, so you can copy this if you need to for any reason. If it's a reference, then you can hover over this. It'll show what the relationship is. Yep, and if you click on it, so this is the C version. Okay, if there's a pick list, you can hover over that and get the pick list values. You can click on it, and it will copy those to your clipboard as well, which can sometimes be handy. Maybe you need to paste them in a spreadsheet or in the code that you're writing. Okay. Also for relationships, so Salesforce allows you to query up to 10 levels in parent relationships, but that's slightly difficult to represent in the UI. So right now I'm only supporting one level up. I want to support a lot more. Go ahead and clear the filters here. But for example, because we created a lookup from lead to product, now product shows here as a related object. So now we can open this up and we can come say, oh, we want to see a little bit of information about the product. And we can see over here that it's building our query.
So this goes back to the R, it's the related object, plus the field name from that object. And so that's what the major difference is. That underscore R is just a relationship back to whatever object you're referencing.
Yep. And so one note there, we also have created account. So this is a relationship, but notice that if the relationship is not a custom relationship, it's built into Salesforce, they don't use underscore R. And then the standard field name would be, it's always whatever the name is. So converted account and then the word ID at the end. Okay, so if you're on like the contact record, there's a lookup to the account. If you're working in Apex and you want to mention that relationship, it would be account ID. That's not really exposed in the UI anywhere. You just have to know their convention. So it's really difficult when you're learning, but then after you figure it out, it's not too challenging. Yep.
And I didn't know that these tools exist.
Yeah,
sure.
Because,
Yeah, we use the console that you said.
the Salesforce console for doing the queries.
Yes, there's some other tools. I'll get into those later. Remind me to talk about competitors.
Okay. So yeah, we have those listed on a slide as well,
okay.
Where it's and we can jump into it at the end of this session. Okay. So talk about those.
The other parts of building a query is maybe you want to order by the created date. So we'll do created date. We'll sort in descending order. That means newer ones first. And then if we want to limit that to some number of records, this stuff over here is optional. I also have the ability that you can add filters. So this will build the where clause on your query. So if we wanted to say where created date is equal to today, for example, it'll build that query. Salesforce has some handy things where working with dates, they have these things called date literals. where you can just use English and it will figure out dates. Otherwise, formatting dates can be a little bit tricky. So this is a way that you can dynamically work with dates. I'm going to go ahead and figure this one out. Okay, so after you've queried that data, so number one, you can copy that to the clipboard. I'll go ahead and submit. So from here, here's our query up here. You can easily edit that, but we have all the results listed down here of all of our data. Okay, a couple other cool features here. Anytime that you see this link, you can click on that record. It'll take you right to that record in Salesforce. You know, so a lot of times it's, oh, I want to look at, I'm looking at products, and now I want to go look at, you know, this product. So you can click on that. Also, because we only queried a limited number of fields, maybe you want to see all the other fields on a specific record. So this database icon, you click on that, it shows this modal, and then it goes out and makes a query and gets the full data set for this one record that we're working with. So that can be handy in some use cases.
It's not possible to put an star in the select clause.
No, no.
You have to specify all the.
Yep. So I mean, I can go back. So if you want to select star, I mean, you can come here and click select all.
But it has to build it out.
Yep.
I don't have no possibility.
I've heard rumors that they're thinking about working on it. At Dreamforce, they mentioned that. So, great. So that's the basic of the query page. There's a couple other things here. I'm going to jump back and actually, let's go take a look at the product record. Okay. So the API name of the product is called product2. So there was likely a version in the past called product. And so when you're working with the product object, that's product2. So the product object is the base of your product catalog. So that represents your products that you're selling to your customer. And remember how we made a relationship from lead to product? So we had a lookup to product. So anytime you have a relationship in that order, that means each lead can have one product associated with it. But anytime you do that, it creates a child relationship so that if you're querying on product, you can get all the leads that have a lookup to that product. Okay, so SOCL, we'll talk about this a little bit more on Friday, but it's a subquery. So you're, for every record, you can query X number of child records as well. So on FuseKit, there's this button down here that you can click. It'll go query all the data that it needs, but you will see leads here. So this is the child relationship name. Okay, so it's you can go in the UI, and if you go to the lead object and click on product, you'll be able to see the child relationship name. If it's a standard Salesforce object, then it will just be whatever the API name of the related object is, but in plural. There's no underscore. Okay, so if we click on this, we can come get information about a lead. I'll just choose a couple of fields here. And then we'll go ahead and query some of our base product fields. Product code is a good one. Okay. So this is a similar query to what we did previously. Actually, let me get some. Let me get a couple extra fields here. Okay. All right. So now what we've done is we've said, show me all the products, and for every single one of those products, I want to get a list of all the leads that have a lookup to any individual product. Okay. So we support subqueries. So clicking on query, this shows us all of our products. And then in this leads column, notice there's only one result, but if we click on that, then it'll show an array of all the data. So it shows it in JSON, a little bit technical, but from a developer, we probably like that. So, so one other thing that that I've done on FuseKit, I don't know if anyone's written unit tests in Apex yet, but one thing that you do when you write unit tests is the database does not have any records in it. You have to create all those by hand. So if you need to create records from the product catalog, actually I'm just going to go back here real quick, then a common activity is that you would need to look at your records that exist in Salesforce and create code to create versions of those just for your unit test. So I'm going to go ahead and just show the fields that are not creatable, or yeah, only show creatable fields. So under this actions column over here, I have some things. So you can get the record as JSON. You can edit the record. So this will pull up an edit dialog. You can come click and say, oh, this has no product family. You can clone the record, delete the record, or you can get this record as Apex. So it will take this record and it will generate an Apex representation of that. You can also say, oh, wrap it in a method, remove nulls. If there were any date fields, you could say use today's date instead of whatever date we're showing. That would just change the Apex. So if you're writing unit tests, this thing is really handy to just say, oh, I want to create some mock data that looks identical to this record. You can also do that for a group of records. So I can select all, and then I can choose get as Apex. It'll create a method, add all those to a list, and then at the end it'll just return that data. So that can be pretty handy in quite a few different use cases around unit tests. Okay, and then if you click on these features, again, that impacts on all
You did this on your free time, you said?
mostly, yeah. So I started this November of last year, so I've been working on it for just over a year. But there's 2 developers now, and we have a project manager. So I'm spending time during the day working on it now. But in the beginning, it was just nights and long.
Let us know when we can give some applause on this.
So actually, I mean, what I would like from your group, I think the key thing is that since all you guys are very technical and developers, just providing feedback on, oh, I want this feature. This is confusing. I don't understand this. Oh, hey, there's a bug. There are some bugs around. We have a lot of open tickets. But I do have this submit feedback. So once you get access, so in addition to emailing me or messaging me, you can just put in information here about what's going on. You can drag images over here as well. So.
Awesome. Here now you're retrieving data. Is there a feature to retrieve metadata?
Yes. Yeah. There's a few different features. Yeah. So this is data. So one common operation is that maybe we want to add a product family to all these things. So we'll get into metadata. I'll get into that here pretty quickly. So I'll just go ahead and download. So clicking download, you have 3 options here. So CSV, Excel, or JSON. I'll just keep this as CSV. So a common thing is, oh, I just added these new fields. Now I need to go do a data load to populate all those fields with data. So the query page and the page I'm going to show next, which is the data loader, they work hand in hand in many cases. So let's go. So these are all null for product family. I'll just go ahead and add. I'll just add none for all those. Okay, so that's query. So the data loader, I'll just show the basic data loader here first. So those are product. Okay, so for the data load, we support all the Salesforce operations, which is insert, update, upsert, and delete. So an upsert is either update an existing record or create a brand new record. So you can specify a field that you want to use as the ID field. It has to be marked as an external ID for that feature to work. In this case, we'll just go ahead and choose update.
And when creating those fields, essentially, you can determine whether it's an external ID or not, and then it will essentially ensure that all values are unique.
So from here, I'll go ahead and drag this file over. All right, so what we've done is we've said on the product record, we want to update all of our records. And then I provided this spreadsheet of all the data, and then we can map fields. So what this will do is this read the CSV, it got the metadata from Salesforce, and then attempted to match based on the column header to find out what field it should be matched to. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and remove all these fields that we don't care about. So we updated product family, so I'll just say I only want to update that one field. And then you can also map to, you can, like, let's say we were inserting leads. If we had a field, like if we had the product code, but really Salesforce wants the product ID to know which product to associate this to. If it was the product, I'm a product too. Yeah, you can specify an external ID. You can link to related records to say which record is this relationship pointing to, even if you don't know what the Salesforce ID is. All right, so anyways, we hit save mapping. I have some additional features here, trim white space. If you want to insert null values, then you have to explicitly state that because the way the Salesforce bulk API works. We can also go get the metadata for these objects, and if there are fields that are listed as read-only, we can automatically remove that from your data set, so you know, as a user, you don't have to worry about what your CSV looks like. And then also, we can match, if the field's a date or a date time, we can read your data and run it through all these regular expressions to try to figure out what format it's currently in. One issue with this, I can see, is that the US date format is different than the date format you guys use. We use month, day, year.
Yeah.
So this is only written to work with the US date format. So that would be a nice option here if I said, oh, what, you know, what.
No, but no worries. We are used to use the
Month, day, year. But it's one thing that for us to keep in mind when we're uploading for orgs that are global.
Yeah.
That we will need to make sure that this works in some way, shape, or form in those other things. Right now, it works great for a lot of our projects, but when we start going more global projects, this will probably have to be modified.
So I'll go ahead and load this. So if you haven't interacted with the Salesforce API, this is the bulk API that's an asynchronous API. So first you have to create a job. Then you have to create batches where you're saying, okay, process this data. So it loads the data in, and then some records can be successful, some records can fail. So it's not an all or nothing. From here, we can show the records. We can click this link to go look at the bulk job in Salesforce, and you can download your data there as well. So this shows pretty much the same view that we were looking at. Okay, so this is the basic data loader. So those are the two, I would say these are the two functions that are used most often. Mostly the query page. Even as a developer, I spend most of my time on this page. Even if I don't want to write queries, just to look at the API names, look at relationships between data. I use this just to quickly interact. And then if you want to switch what org you're in, it's as easy as just clicking a drop down. It'll re-query the data, and you can pull all that back in. Okay. One last thing on this query page. Up on the top right, it does keep track of your query history in your browser. So you can go easily re-query data that you maybe queried in the past. And that's filtered by your username. So by default, it'll only show queries that you've done on your own username, but maybe if you did a query in a different org, you can come check any of these other usernames, and then you can try to resubmit those. A lot of times, though, you have so many custom fields that the query that works in one org won't work in another org because the fields that you're querying against don't exist.
Can you modify?
Yeah, so right here, you can.
I mean, go back to the query folder.
Oh, so if you click history and go back, so we retain the state of this page when you go back and forth, but if you change the query, this page won't represent that change on the other page. Yeah, but if you are on this page and you click a bunch of stuff, and then you go back, it'll retain that page, even if you go to a totally different page. So this is the basic query builder. There's a few different ways to query metadata. So the most obvious one is to just come to this query metadata object. Okay, so metadata. So we talked about custom objects or objects, and that's the same thing as a database table. So the definition of that is considered metadata, and then the records are considered data. So Salesforce uses this term all the time, so it's part of their terminology. So metadata is going to be things like custom fields, workflow rules, the tabs along the top of your org. If you make new profiles, no, profiles might be regular data, but all sorts of different things.
Validation rules, workflows.
Yep. So if I come here, I can say custom field. I can choose that as my metadata. And then it'll show, these are all the attributes that Salesforce stores related to metadata. Okay, so I can come, there is one large restriction here. Okay, this full name field, and there's another field called metadata. The tooling API doesn't support, you can only return one record at a time if you have either of those fields checked. Okay, so I'm going to run this, we're going to get an error. So Salesforce said that we got an error, so let me close this. So the full name field it's a complex, it's an expensive piece of data for them to get. And actually first I'll just go ahead and say limit 1. Great, yeah, so the full name field, and then this other field is the metadata. If I click on this, that's a very complex field. Like this is all the data that was stored in that one field return. So if you want to return either one of those, you can only get one result. But if we remove those from our query, then we will be able to get all of our results here. So if I remove full name and metadata, if I remove those, then I can query, I'll just say limit 100 because there'll be a whole bunch. Right, and this will be all of the fields across all of our objects. Okay. So that's just an example. If there's a lot of data in one field, then it shows in a modal. So that's one way to query metadata. There's quite a few other ways to query metadata. The next feature that's most often used is this comparison. All right, so there's a scenario. Let me go ahead and switch orgs here. I'll go to these demo orgs that I use for use kit demos. So these two orgs, let's just say that demo org 1, that this is like our dev environment, and demo org 2 is our UAT environment. And we have these configurators that are in there, and they're making changes. Things are broken. You know, you do deployment. Maybe they're in UAT and they're making changes directly, and they never went through dev. So that's kind of a common use case because Salesforce gives so much power to lots of people to make changes, and those changes can break your code. They can break validation rules. They can break the way the CPQ works. There's just all sorts of things. So this comparison page, the first one, this objects, this will compare all of the fields across multiple objects that you might want to compare. So in this case, I'll go ahead and compare account, contact, lead, opportunity. These are just standard objects. And the other one would be product 2. Okay. So you can select everything if you want. In this case, there's 322 objects. If you're on a project, then they probably have double that many objects. I mean, once you install CPQ, you get an additional 71. Once you install billing, you get a whole bunch more. And so this, you probably only care about the objects that you are generally changing or that are in your critical path code. So after we hit compare, what this does is this goes out and it retrieves the metadata for both objects in each org, and then we can compare and figure out what the differences are. So in this case, for their fields, we have 9 differences on what the definition was. And so the way that this works is that so by default, it just shows the items that are matching. So there's 63 things compared that do match. And so if it's green on the source and the target, that means it exists in both of those orgs. If it's red, that says this field doesn't actually even exist in one of those orgs. So then if we click on that, it just shows the non-matching items, but we wanted to show these are all the things that are compared. So when you create a field in the Salesforce UI, these are all the attributes that describe that field. So when you created the background, this is all the stuff that Salesforce is keeping track of. So this is considered the metadata. It's data about other data, right? It's describing data. So I'll just go ahead and click Show Non-Matching Values. What this is showing is that this field is a pick list, and in our source org, we have different values in the pick list. So a pick list is just a drop down. We have different values in the source and the target. This is a really common area where things can be misaligned. Number one, if it's a standard field, like account type is a standard field, that means Salesforce provides it to you no matter what. You can't delete it. You can change the values in here, but you also can't deploy this metadata from one org to another org. You have to do this change manually, and because of that, it's very frequent that someone might forget to do that, or and just might not even know they have to do that. And so having a comparison of pick lists can become a really nice thing to have. You know, and so there's some other stuff here. This one says, oh, the help text is different in one org versus the other org. And then we also provide the ability for you to download a report of all of this data. So this shows some fields here. I'll go ahead and download this. Okay, and then before I open that up, I'll just do a quick run through. So fields is the most common. We also have object attributes. This just includes things like when you create a brand new object, these are all the attributes that you can set on the objects. You don't see differences on these very much, but if there are differences, they'll be mentioned. If there are record types, then we will compare those as well. So record types is saying, you know, you've got 10 records in a database. You can flag records to say, this is a white, you know, let's say it's an account. Let's say that you have gold accounts and silver accounts. That's arbitrary, but you can specify a record type so that when you access that record, the page layout can look different. Or you can say that different profiles have access to that record or don't have access to that record based on the record type. And you can also change what pick list values show up based on the record type. So you can control the layout just by tagging this, you know, type attribute. So in this case, we can see that we have record types defined in one of the orgs, but not the other org. Okay. One other thing you can do here is you can click on this dates. You can toggle dates. So this will show this is the name of the user, demo org 1 and demo org. So normally this would show like the actual person's name, but it'll show the date of when this field was created and when was it last modified. So that's really helpful when you see that, oh, there's a mismatch when I'm comparing, and it's got Zeke's name next to it. So I'm going to reach out to him and say, hey, why did you change this in UAT? And now it's different. Notice it doesn't come up for standard fields because the API doesn't return that data information for standard fields. So it only works for custom fields. Okay, so we'll go ahead and jump into this report really quickly. So this report just shows a summary of the data that was compared. Yeah, so I'm not going to go through all this, but it does have, we have a special tab just for pick lists. So this will show the pick list values in each of these orgs. So you can easily identify this, because this is a hotspot on project. So presenting this information just is a big time saver. Okay, so that's our basic comparison. We also have the ability to compare Apex and Visualforce. So I'll go ahead and jump in. There's two versions of that. The first version looks almost identical to this. This visual comparison shows line-by-line differences, just like you would get in a source control system. So this one shows, first off, you choose, these are generally the components. If you're developing in Lightning, that's not quite supported yet, but all the standard Apex stuff is. So this shows here that there was a difference on this Apex class. It exists in both the works, and it shows who last edited that. And clicking load diff will show line-by-line comparison of what was changed. Okay, so red means it exists in the source. Green means it exists in the target, but not the other work. So this is helpful even for non-developers. So like, let's say that you're a QA person and you're going to test out some code that someone wrote, or maybe you're going to validate a deployment. So you're going to go do a regression run. If something's not working, you can say, oh, let me look at all the code. Oh, hey, this is different. Then you can go contact the developer, whoever it is, and try to, have them go fix it or figure out what's going on. So we have a lot of our non-developers. They're generally the ones doing the comparison. As a developer, when I'm troubleshooting, I look at it, but the other folks use it a lot more frequently than I would. There's also a record comparison. For example, you want to compare your product catalog in dev with your product catalog in UAT. It'll query the records and compare all the fields on the record to figure out what's different. Also, one quick thing with that, let me jump back to, this might not be the best example, but, all right, so let's say that when you build a query here, you can click this button down here that will take you to the record comparison page. Notice in the URL, we've transferred the query over to this page, and we automatically put that here for you. Otherwise, you can copy and paste that here. This also supports multiple queries. So let's say that you wanted to compare records across your entire product catalog, and with CPQ, that's 3 different objects at least. So you can insert multiple queries here, and it will go those at the same time. Cool. And then also you have to specify which field you want to use to know which records are matched. So the name field, this is a standard field for all objects that Salesforce automatically adds. That's one, but in your product catalog, you might say, oh, the product code is that unique identifier, or whatever the field might be. And there's another use case where you want to compare records in one org to other records in that same org. Like, hey, permissions are different on these 2 users. I want to compare these 2 users to try to figure out what's different about their profile. So you can choose the same org for your source and target, and then you can choose this custom field mapping. And this is where you could come and say, oh, I want to match on the username. You would put that up here, and then you would specify username 1 and username 2, and so it will match those records, even if the value is not the same. Okay, and there's some basic metadata comparison as well. So this just compares if things exist in both orgs. It doesn't. The level of the things that it compares aren't really all that complex. Let me see. Yeah, so these are all the metadata objects that Salesforce has. So you can choose these things. You can select everything if you wanted to. And then once you hit compare, you can compare things. If it was from a managed package, that would show up here. But in general, you probably don't really care about those. You only care about the things that you're developing. So what this compares is just the full name of what the object is, and then let's go ahead and show all. So these are all the attributes that it has to compare by, some date. So basically, you can just say, I want to see if all of my custom fields or all of my email templates exist in this org or that org, or workflow rules, but it just checks if they exist. It doesn't really check about any of the complex attributes like we saw when we were comparing custom objects. And And then I have a full metadata comparison for record types and for profiles. So I'm not going to get into those. Great. So we just to recap, we looked at query. We've looked at the first part of our data load, and we've looked at comparison. So those are the most commonly used features. The last thing on this other data loader, I'm not going to demo this. But what this will allow you to do is this allows you to load in data, but retain their relationship in the database. Okay, so like, let's say that you wanted to load in leads, accounts, contacts, and opportunities, but they have relationships to each other. So the accounts have to be loaded in before the contacts can be loaded in, because on the contact, you have to know what the parent record is. So this is called load data with relationships. What this allows you to do is this allows you to create an Excel spreadsheet where you have multiple tabs along the bottom here. So this first tab says accounts, second tab says contacts. So first off, you specify what the API name of the object that you're working with on this individual tab. You specify what your database operation is, insert, update, upsert. And then you put you create a reference for each item here. So this is an arbitrary reference that you can use this value on any of these other spreadsheets, so that you can say, oh, this contact belongs to account 1. And then you put your field names and your values here. Okay, so then on the contacts page, to specify what record it's related to, you just wrap it in curly brackets and then specify the reference name and then put .id. So this will just load in the data. This is using, let me just go ahead. So this is using a Salesforce API called the Composite API. Basically what it does is it reads your spreadsheet and it puts your data in a format like this. This is how their Composite API works. So I'm using the Salesforce API that allows this functionality. I'm just exposing it in a spreadsheet so that it's really easy for a user to be able to load this data in. This feature is pretty beta. It hasn't been used very much. So I would recommend like testing it in the dev org before using it on a client org. But yeah, and I show this so that as you're looking at it, you can, if you're a developer, you can analyze that and say, oh, okay, you'll know what's going in, and so you can check it out before you actually commit that. So in this case, if we hit submit, what it would be doing is it would be making every single row we have here. So these 3 records would be API call number 1, and we would get 1 account, 1 contact, and then 1 child account. So we would end up with 2 accounts and 1 contact. And so each one of these, I guess I can probably just load this. Okay, yeah, there's reference to a custom field that doesn't exist in my org, but yeah, it'll show information here. So each one is submitted separately from the other one. So one thing to consider when you're working, so this uses everything via API, this whole FuseKit tool. And so if you wanted to load in like 1 million records, this is going to make a lot of API calls. So you probably want to do this on this page with low data. If you need to load in high volume, then you'll have to use the bulk load data.
The hardest part there is that relationship, isn't it?
Yeah, and there's ways to get around that. We can probably talk about those throughout the rest of the week. So, okay, so one other, I'll show you guys REST really quickly. Since you guys are learning, since you're all developers, you might be curious and want to go check this out. So what the REST does, this REST API, it just exposes a generic way for you to make HTTP requests to Salesforce, and it adds your authentication headers. So you can come explore how their API works. You can just make calls to their endpoint to see what the data looks like. Maybe you're building an integration and you want to look at the data on any of their APIs. So their APIs, in general, fairly discoverable. And what that means is that we can hit this endpoint, and Salesforce will show you, it will return, hey, we're basically saying, hey, these are all the endpoints we have available on our API. So then if we come choose S object, okay, so the S object, it says call this endpoint. So I will go ahead and just append this API or this name over here. So you can hit that, and then it'll show S objects. So this shows all of their, just a list of objects. So on the query page, when I showed a list of objects and you clicked on one, I'm using this API. So this is the data that I get back. I'm just showing it in the UI format. So this shows how this works. And then Salesforce in general, anytime you query records, they will give you a link to that record. So you can really script your APIs to be able to work with the return data. They give you enough information that you know what type of record is and things like that. But this one says, you can now do /accounts up here, and then we can get information related to the account object. Okay, and so normally it has fields here. Okay, yeah, so this is their API call. So that's REST. This is, I don't think this is used all that much, but if you're building an integration, sometimes this can be fun to go click around with. All right, so miscellaneous tools, I have, so you saw how we created the product lookup. We run the lead and we create a lookup to product. So let's say that you're building an integration and you need to create a staging object where you're going to use Apex to put all your data into this object that's in the format of, let's say, Oracle, so that you're doing transformations in Salesforce, putting it in the staging object, and then via API they can come get that data, and it's already massaged and transformed and ready for Oracle. So if that's the case, you might need to create a new object that has like 100 fields on it, which is, doing in the UI one by one will take a long time. So what this does, this allows you to create fields in bulk. So we could come say, I could come choose the account object, and we could say, oh, I'm going to make a field called field 1, and it's going to be email field, or maybe it's going to be a lookup to the product or something like that. You can clone the field, you can add another one. So this just allows you to easily just work with all this data. But in addition to that, it allows you to upload an Excel spreadsheet. Maybe. Let me close out. This didn't open for some reason. Great. So this is where you can just create a spreadsheet of your fields and all your data. So depending on what your field type is, some of these fields are like conditionally required. So you specify what the label of your field is, what the API name is, what type it is, if you want help text, all those things that we configured. You can just create a spreadsheet of all that data. You can then load this spreadsheet, and then it will go add all those fields here, and then you can deploy those to your org. So there's certain times when you have to do this. So in the life cycle on a project, usually you're creating fields just a few at a time, but there's a feature in CPQ we're going to talk about that's called twin fields. What this allows you to do is, if you have fields with the same API name across different objects, Salesforce CPQ will propagate the values down for you automatically. So let's say that you, they have their quote object and they have their opportunity object. So you can have fields automatically go from one object to another. Doesn't go from one opportunity?
No.
All right,
so it's only on specific objects. They're constantly updating that list.
It's actually right here.
Yeah, right there.
Right.
So opportunity products goes down. So a lot is on the individual line basis. This list is growing. They have it on the Steelbrick custom site as well. Or is that where you're pulling this from?
I just copy and pasted. So the main thing is, when you're on a project, you might need to create a field with the same API name on multiple objects in bulk. So what this bulk field creator allows you to do, really select multiple objects. You know, maybe you want to add like an external ID to all your objects, and there's a few use cases when that might be handy. But you can deploy fields. So you probably just want to do one or two at a time, but you can deploy this and it will deploy these fields to multiple objects at once. So it's really just an administrator tool that can come in handy.
But it's nice because it's the exact same type of field with the same restrictions.
Yeah, it's exactly the same.
Yeah.
So
across those.
Yep. And then you can select which profiles you want to have access to. The one thing it won't do is it does not add it to the page layout. So after you add these fields, you go into the Salesforce UI on a record, it won't show up there. You have to go edit the layout and drag it so it's visible. Okay, so it's 424. Couple other features that exist. Let's say that you just created a new workflow rule. So if you don't know what a workflow rule is, what that does is that anytime a record is changed, you can have this rule fire where it will maybe update other fields on the record. So you can say, stage is changed from prospecting to analysis to prospecting, or whatever those stages are. You can say, go update some other field on the account that says, maybe it was the date stage was last changed. They can be anything you want. But what will happen is when you add that workflow rule, it's not retroactive. It only applies to new changes moving forward. So one use case is, I want to run that workflow rule on all my existing records so that they go through this process and the data gets updated. So what the bulk populate records allows you to do is that it will allow you to force record updates across a whole bunch of records. So let me just show. There's a few use cases for this. So number one is this bottom one is no change, just update record. So this is like if you want a workflow rule to run, you say, I don't actually want to change anything. I just want to make it so that they hit the database so that any automation built on those fields will be processed. So that's number one. Another use case is where you're adding an external ID to a field so that when you deploy that to your next org, you can use that to load data to that. You can load child records and you can specify what the parent record is without actually knowing what the database ID is in UAT. And so to do that, a common pattern is you create a field that's called like external ID, and if you populate that with the same ID that's used in dev, then when it goes to UAT, you'll have the ID of dev saved in that external ID field. So you can export your data, which has that ID. So now you can use that as your lookup. So this will allow you to select that external ID, and you can populate that field with a value from any other field on that record. So this one would query all the accounts, and then it would set the type on every single record. It would set the type field equal to, it would move the ID and stamp that on the type field. It would be easier if I showed you an example of how the related data works, but normally on deployments of data, that's a common activity. All right, so I'll show you guys just a couple small things over here. So Salesforce has quite a few different APIs. One of their APIs they have is their Metadata API. And part of the Metadata API, they allow you to do deployments of metadata using their API. So we created a field on the lead object called product. Now what if we want to deploy that field using code from dev to UAT? That's what their Metadata API allows you to do. And so when we installed this, when we installed the managed package, that's all behind the scenes using the same structure. They just expose that in a way where it's like packaged, and there's a a UI where you can look at things. Let me see what I want to show you guys first. So All right, so if, let's say that you wanted to deploy data from one org to another org. Let me go back to our Argentina org here real quick. Okay. All right, so we're on the deployment page, package generator. So what this will do is this will allow you to build a package just like this CPQ package that we installed. This allows you to build that and download it. So I'll go ahead and show you guys what that looks like. Just so, actually I have more for this other work here. So field. All right, so I'll go ahead and hit submit. So if you're on a project, Salesforce has something called the change set where you can deploy metadata. So this is just your way to do that using the API. So we've chosen a few metadata types here. So what that'll do is this will show all of those metadata types and allow you to put those into a package so that you can deploy it to another org. So this could be things like tabs, apps, custom objects, custom fields, validation rules, workflow rules. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things. So we can just, I'll go ahead and select everything here. This was, all right, workflow. I'm actually going to uncheck that one. So there are two parts to this. Number one is this package.xml file. That's the definition that Salesforce requires so that, using that package, you can retrieve metadata from an org, or that's kind of their foundation to this metadata API. It's all SOAP, and it's all based on XML and then a file structure. So I'll go ahead and download the zip file. So what we're doing now is dynamically, we've selected these objects, and then dynamically, FuseKit is building the package XML, and then it's calling Salesforce, and it's saying, hey, here's this XML file. Give me all this data in a package format. And so that's an asynchronous API that will then build a zip file. Normally, it doesn't take too long. I'll go ahead and open this up. That should take just a minute here. Yeah, the API is pretty complex, but it can be tricky to work with. I think on the Atlassian project, they're doing some stuff with the metadata API. So. Great. So this is what the package structure, the package XML file looks like. So in this case, this is custom fields. So also, if you search, I don't know if you guys have had exposure, but there's the Ant migration tool that Salesforce has. So as you develop more on Salesforce, you might come across that. That's a tool where you can create Ant scripts that interact with the API. So it's all doing the same thing that FuseKit does, but you just use Ant scripts, and then they have a library where the API is.
Yeah, I was about to ask you about that because the guys from Atlassian are doing the deployment from the dev environment to the stage environment and using I guess they are using some tool like that. Okay. Because they are doing it using the AC. I mean, a job in Bamboo that is
right.
the AC from Atlassian. So
sure, yeah. So either they're using the Ant migration tool or they're using some other API. I know some of their stuff was written in Python. I don't know if it's all written in Python or not. So.
Do you really quick just some other handy tools? You use Chrome, right? Mm-hmm. You have the API field names extension.
Sure. Chrome? Yeah, I can run through that.
It's just a real quick.
Yeah.
These are just quick tools and extensions onto Chrome that help if you're just within the org and you don't want to jump into FuseKit or go into other screens to navigate and view API field names. You just need something really quick if you navigate to them.
Yeah. Is it cool is it alright if I cover all those?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I was.
Great, so that's an overview of FuseKit. So I'm hoping you guys can all have access and use it, and I'm happy to answer other questions, or once you have more context and experience, I can do another quick demo, and it might make more sense on the areas where you're not familiar with yet. So there's some other Salesforce tools that are very handy, especially if you're using Chrome. So number one, when we're on this record page, these are all the field labels. So the field labels are nice if you're a user, but if you're a developer, you need to know what the API names are. So there's an extension that's called API names. And by clicking on that, this only works in Classic, not Lightning, but it will swap all of these fields to the API name.
Yeah. Okay. You will use this as a configurator or as a developer. You will use this probably 90% of the time. Just when you get to a page, a lot of times I will just instantly switch it because I don't really care about the labels that are being displayed. I just need the API name to that label.
Watch out sometimes if it's on custom objects. What you'll notice is the fields will actually switch columns.
So that's
The
only
fields on
if,
the right side.
that's only if there's a lot of fields on the page and they have weird like layouts of
Because
left and
it'll
right columns,
just
like
round
big
over.
blank spots.
So just note that it won't always be in the same spot sometimes.
Yeah,
But
that's,
and then do you have Salesforce Inspector?
well, I'll go through mine, and then if there's any I missed, you can jump on. So one other Salesforce item. So in the setup menu, all those things we saw on the left, there's one called Salesforce Navigator. And what that allows you to do is it just pops up this little toolbar, and you can say, oh, I want to look at my account fields, or I want to look at installed packages. So you can just type that in, and it'll go right to the page. Now we can see that we have CPQ installed. Earlier that wasn't here. Notice it's a trial, so we get it for a few months. And then one other plugin that I really like is called Organizer. This allows you to have one-click login access. I don't know why it's taking so long. Okay. Yeah, no, I think the block is because he created an activity. It's
Oh, it's trying to
remind
inform
me.
you of the activity?
I think so.
Sorry.
Yeah, so Organizer, this allows you to organize all your logins to Salesforce. So over time, what's going to happen is you'll get on a project, and your client will say, okay, great, here's access to our dev org, here's our UAT, here's maybe production. They'll give you user access, usually to 2, 3, or 4, or 5 orgs at a time. This is like, oh, I have 5 Salesforce logins for this client, 3 for this client, I've got my 8 dev orgs. So this allows you to have to store all your orgs, and then with one-click access, you can log into those orgs. My password's probably expired on that org, but you can log in just using one click, and you can also search for these orgs. So I recommend this org for sure. You can also use it in incognito mode. So sometimes that's handy because, especially in Lightning, it'll cache a lot of things. So you might need to use that once in a while. I think that's the main orgs that I use. One other thing that this allows you to do, this allows you to add different Favicon colors. We'll go hot pink. Great. And so now if I refresh this page, up here in the browser, it now adds prefix. You can be like, oh, this is Atlassian Dev, or this is whatever UAT, which is handy.
You have a list of all of these.
We can produce a list and make sure that we get them over to you guys. And you'll see that sometimes you use them. I don't actually use the login one. I probably will start. It's not technically run by our IT yet as fully okay, but I think it happens behind the scenes enough that it's probably okay. But yeah, we will go ahead and produce the list. The other one, if you wouldn't mind going and grabbing really quick, Austin, is Salesforce Inspector. And so this one is, and I see you've been there before, and you may actually already, no, you don't have it. So this adds just another quick menu. And if you do you mind adding it, Austin? Yeah. It takes a whole lot of
I hope I
time.
like it.
So if you go back to just any like lead or anything else, doesn't matter. Over on, if it's enabled, is it enabled? Over on the far right, yeah. So right above it, you see there's the second quick list menu. Is you behind the scenes there are a lot of data and whatnot that isn't exposed on the screen itself. And instead of having it added to the layout and then see it and then remove it from the layout, because you also don't want to change people's orgs, you can click show all data. And now we have all of the fields and then their data value right there up top.
That's pretty handy.
And so this is handy because a lot of times what I was having to do is you're within dev orgs or production orgs, they don't want you to modify the layout because then multiple people see it, depending on who has access to that layout. And so this allows us to say, okay, well, I know the exact users that are on here, and it exposes all the fields that I don't normally see within the layout itself. And it just is essentially an extra little quick menu here, and you can expose all of that, and you can expose the metadata associated on that record or on that object and everything else. I use this quite a bit. Every once in a while, you'll see that it definitely has maybe a bug on some objects. I can't remember exactly what it is, but where it will, like for true and false, sometimes it will say blank instead of false. But I think that's more of a Salesforce issue that we run into when I say it was
the default value.
Yeah, the default value is
yeah.
So this is something that I've used just so that I don't have to hop into a different tool or edit a layout. I can just quickly get the value that I need and go from there.
Cool. This probably doesn't work in Lightning either. The way
I don't know.
the way that they like have the access token exposed, I think is.
Yeah, you'd have to check.
Do you have
But-
a hands formulator as well?
I don't know because organizer comes with one, so it was like making two
In your formula?
Yeah. So this kind of comes with one. Yeah. And there's probably some other Chrome plugins. I think we can have some other ones. So when you're editing formulas on a field, that's one area where it's kind of handy to have some additional capability. There's some formula fields here. So formulas are just like, Excel formulas. And so as you're editing these, some common things that you might do is you might say, hey, when this related field equals this value, then show this value, otherwise show this value. And in some cases, they can get really complex, especially if you're working with dates, because there are some formulas, there's like some operators you can use, but for dates, they really suck. So, you might have to show a lot of things. So there's some plugins. Organizer comes with one where it adds like syntax highlighting, and you can hit tab and it will tab instead of going to the next field, wherever the Z index is. But there's another one that's called like Enhanced Formula Editor that's a standalone option as well.
So does this track like the parentheses ends?
I don't know if this version does, no.
Because a lot of times I will copy and paste formulas into some text editor so I can track my parentheses number. Because when you start getting into, I've had formulas go to about 15 to 20 nested ifs, and they can get very complex very quickly just with the way that they're structured. And so that's one reason why I wish that they used more of the
Right. Something that was a lot better for a developer.
Yeah, exactly. Because most oftentimes that's sort of the approach that we take. But they've used a similar formatting to Excel because that's what most business users and other IT folks would use. But I come at it from more of a developer background, and so it can be frustrating for sure.
Cool. All right, so it's 4:43. That's an overview of FuseKit and some Chrome extensions that make your life a little bit easier. Any questions?
I have a question, but it's not completely related to this.
Sure.
If you, well, I was trying to create an order using another object using the API,
Mhm.
and I don't know why I couldn't replicate the same in this exactly the same way that the order was created using the UI.
So yeah, so there's a couple of different things. So we're getting into CPQ land now. So on the code object, generally there's a workflow where either from the quote or opportunity, a user is probably going to check a box that says order. When they click on that and save the record, what that does is there's a trigger. We'll talk about triggers on Friday, but a trigger is when a database operation happens, run some code. So what's happening is when you click order, Salesforce CPQ is running a bunch of code to generate the data for that order. So if you just create just an order record from the API, none of that data will come over automatically because all their code runs based on either opportunity or
Well, I
well,
tried a lot of things, but once one thing that I tried that was creating a quote, and then create quote lines, and then update the quote and put the ordered field in true and update the quote. And since Salesforce tried to create an order based on that quote, but it was giving me some strange errors like I don't know, the unit price cannot be null, something like that.
Sure. So
So you all the word product?
yeah, you probably all right, so when you created your quote and your quote lines, what happens is, assuming you added all the fields correctly, yeah, when you create your quote lines, that kicks off an asynchronous process to synchronize that back to the opportunity. So you have to wait until that's done before you say order true, because it's using fields from the opportunity. And if that synchronization process is still running, or it hasn't started, or it hasn't finished, then the order won't be able to be created. So there's a timing issue there. So what I would recommend, although I'm having some issues with this, I have a case open, but Salesforce CPQ has some global methods that are available that you can use to create quotes and quote lines, where it will do the pricing synchronously before your code's done. So you can use that, and it makes it a lot easier to work with. You can just say, I don't remember what all the specifics are, but you can create quotes and quote lines, and the pricing run immediately with the synchronization and all that stuff.
Yeah, because there is a field that is pricing calculation status, something like that.
Right.
Could be related to that.
So there's two processes. So there's the asynchronous process that syncs quote lines to opportunity products. That's the child records for that. And then once the order is created, another asynchronous process kicks off on the order, and that one creates something called price schedule and price tiers off the order, and that's where the pricing is set there. So once you order something, that job then has to run. When it's done, it will update the price calculation status complete. That has to happen before you can activate the order. So scripting that whole process is really hard because there's asynchronous processes. So it's like, you know, your code's running, but it's really hard to know when those other things are done. How do you even know, you know, that they're running? Like, you can go look those, you can query those jobs, but there's a lot of activity in the system. There's no guarantee that you're getting the job that you want and not someone else's job. So
that makes a lot of sense.
it's tricky. Yeah, these are the types of things that like every single day on every project. You know, as a developer, we have to really know how the CPQ package works, because it's pretty complex.
I ran into the same issue in another project where I have to create some objects using the Java the Java API. And what happened to me, they were not using CPQ, they were using DMI, I think.
Okay.
And what happened to me is that when I wanted to create a quote and add some some products there, there were a lot of I mean, if you do that from the UI, there were a lot of objects created behind that when you were adding products to the code. But you see the Java code that was not happening. So I ended up with an order that was not really the same that you create to the UI. So I spent like 3 days trying to figure out all the different objects that were created from the UI that were not created from the Java code. So I ended up setting up some Selenium tests to do that from the UI because it was impossible to do that. And see, I think Cesar has the same problem.
Yeah, because
here.
Plus that I have to I went to Salesforce to see an order that was correctly created, and then go to the developer console, and you can query the objects. But before that, I have to go to the page to see the field names because that extension that shows the field names is
It's quick and easy.
yeah, of course. Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Sure. We'll give FuseKit a whirl because that, I use that use case all the time. And then also one quick ancillary item. So when you're working with Salesforce Ids, so this is the Salesforce ID that's in the URL. If you're in Lightning, it'll still be in the URL, but there will be a -v at the end. So the way that these IDs work, the first 3 characters, this is the object prefix. So what you can do is if you have an ID, you can do dash whatever. This will take you to the list view of that object. And then if it's a standard object, those are always the same. So notice here, behind here, we have 001-O. I don't know exactly what the O stands for, but that's the standard. When you click on a tab, that's where it takes you. And then the other part about an ID that you need to know is that Salesforce has 2 versions of their ID. They have this version, which is the 15-character version. They also have another version that's the 18-character version. The difference is, the 18-character version is case insensitive. The 15-character version is case sensitive. So the reason, and actually the last 3 digits can be fully derived from the first 15 digits. It's like use the formula so that you can figure that out. The main reason they did that is because tools like Excel are case insensitive and like the Access database. So if you're doing migrations in Excel, they have a connector. There was like issues. So the 18-character version is case insensitive. So you'll get really familiar with IDs.
Yes.
So sometimes you don't want to look up, but you want to know what the ID of the related record is. So you might use like a workflow rule or a formula to just show the ID. And if that's the 15 or the 18-character version, sometimes that can cause some issues. So.
And with the ID, essentially, within each org, if you're creating new objects or new fields, I guess not fields, but records, essentially every org will have a different ID, even though it may be the exact same record until the refresh happens. And the refresh essentially says, take what's in production and refresh my test and dev org, and then they all will have the exact same ID from that point. And then any new additions to records or new records that are created will start having different IDs. So it's one thing just to make sure that the reason why the refresh mainly happens is to align all of the IDs so that you can reference them in both production all the way down to test, and it's very useful when we start getting into the configuration, because we'll be adding records, error conditions, and everything else. Instead of having to go out and build those somewhere else, they'll just be individual records within an object. And I did just send a link to everybody. Hopefully everybody got it. It's just a quick assessment / survey, just to figure out if you guys are comfortable having fun in the course, essentially. But also, it should only take you like 30 seconds to 2 minutes. If you're spending more time on that, then let us know. But the questions, whether you want, if you have any questions for us, go ahead and write them in there, and then we can come in tomorrow morning and address those, start with those, and then we'll jump into Salesforce CPQ after we address these questions. So if you think of anything later today, or you have one now, feel free to just write it in there instead of asking it now, and we can address those tomorrow.
Great, lots of hands-on stuff for the next 3 days.
Yeah.
So.
And so how it will be structured, just to give you guys a little sneak preview, is we'll explain sort of the object that we're going to be interacting with at that point in time. We'll build an activity together. It will be Zeke or I working with you guys to walk through a step-by-step, and you guys follow along. And then right after the build with us, essentially, we will have you guys do one on your own, so that you guys can do that, ask questions, and then we'll move on to the next step of the process. So a lot more interaction.
Great.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Austin, it sounds like you're gonna have to send out